Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we are diving into part 2 of our native plant series. Last week, we talked with Layne Knoche, Martha Smith, and Austin Little all about their top 3 favorite native plants, and then they are back this week to answer our questions all about, once again, native plants. So let's dive right back into it. Well, folks, in addition to learning about our special guests and their favorite native plants, their top 3, this is also a question and answer show. And so we do have questions that have come into extension offices, social medias, all over the place that you might find extension, which might be everywhere. We're trying. So we have a couple questions, and by a couple, I mean a lot, about native plants. This is a hot topic. So let's see, can we get Ken? Would you mind kicking us off on this week's round of questions on native plants?
I can do that. So our first one comes from McDonough County. There was some debate between native versus nativars. Is it okay to plant nativar plants? Are we trying to prevent the genetics from spreading in the wild when it comes to nativars?
Okay. This is something that I have been in many conversations with some pretty top breeders across the United States. And, you know, the nativar was really coined by, I guess, Alan Armitage started that, playing off cultivar, which just means cultivated variety, which means in some way, shape, or form, man has intervened and has resulted in this plant. And there's a lot of debate about, should you stay the purest route with just the straight species, or are these nativars just as suitable? And I have to totally agree with what Layne was saying. You know, if you want some of these plants in your yard, but the straight species is too large, there are smaller ones. Is it a true native? Well, the example that I always give is Baptisia indigo. Baptisia australis is the blue indigo, the false blue indigo. Well, that has been crossed with the yellow, which is Sphaerocarpa. This was done at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and they were in their breeding program. And what resulted was one called Prairie Twilight Blues. And it is a strong grower, gets about 3.5 feet tall, and it has a bicolor flower of a yellow and a purple because of its parentage. Now, is it native? You're looking at, this could have been something, I'm not really sure how they had to cross it, but what if this just happened at random in nature and somebody found it? Would that be then considered more native than what was being bred in some of these growing breeding facilities? So I don't really have an answer. It's an interesting debate. And again, you have to go back to what we started with in the beginning of this conversation, is what's your definition of it? You know, there's some concerns about, you know, the genetics spreading and going wild. But with this particular plant, I haven't seen or heard it happening.
I always like to think about, you know, my own experience in trying to figure out, you know, the answer to this question. I like to think of myself as a native plant purist, but I know that I'm not. And I think a lot of people, are almost afraid to go with native species, especially when you're talking about, you know, some of those shrubs that I was talking about, or even some of the forbs that I'll use coneflower again. Purple coneflower, it's a great native plant. The straight native species, on the other hand, can get to be quite large. I've got several beds of these coneflowers in my own landscape, and they've gotten to be unruly and very large. I don't mind that, but I know that a lot of people do. So you've got cultivars like powwow wildberry or whatever that super popular coneflower cultivar is. I find those species, which are a little bit more dense, compact, they don't spread as easily, this, and this. I find those cultivars to be a good way to start people on native plants. They're not as difficult to maintain. They don't spread as rapidly or whatever. So you get somebody interested, by introducing them to this this species that is, this well-behaved, sort of thing, and you get them interested in it, and then you start to see them enjoy the interactions that they get from the insects that visit them, or the birds that eat the seeds. And then you start building sort of an awareness of that species, Echinacea, as a whole. And then you find yourself starting to find interest in the other species of Echinacea, like Echinacea pallida, which is one of my other favorite native species that I didn't talk about today, pale purple coneflower. That's so, I think it is okay to plant nativars. I like to have a balance between the two, for sure. But I think of myself as a native plant purist, but I do have several nativar, quote unquote, nativar species in my own gardens.
Interesting you chose Echinacea, because that was the one that about 10, 12 years ago, there was just an explosion of every color and every type imaginable. And we were finding there were two main breeders, and one was breeding Echinacea tennesseeensis with paradoxa, which is the yellow, and the other was doing purpurea with paradoxa. And it was very interesting in the literature how the paradoxa with the purpurea, those nativars really did a lot better. So again, man intervened, tried to, do some different crossings, and then found out which ones seemed to do the best. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of the debate against nativars comes from, when you alter the color of a flower so much that pollinators or other wildlife that depend on those flowers, that they don't recognize them anymore. And I don't know, frankly, enough about the science behind all of that to speak, too much on it. But that's where I come in with you have to find the balance, right? Of course, a white coneflower is stunning. It's beautiful. But are there, is it detrimental to pollinator use? I don't know.
Well, so I'll say the Mount Cuba Center in Delaware just came out with a study of coneflower cultivars and stuff, and they specifically looked at pollinators and how some of these nativars compare to the straight species. And I think the most popular one with pollinators was actually one of the white. There's actually more visited more than the straight species. I think when you're talking about kind of really modifying those flowers, when it comes to pollinators, kind of the big concern is when you start getting into the double flowers and stuff.
Sure.
When you get to the point where they can't access that nectar and pollen easily anymore. Some of the colors, that can affect it some. And that study they did, you can see some of those really tail off when it comes to the visitation. But I think the real big concern is when you start modifying the flower shape and stuff. Sure.
But, it's also great to know that there are positive outcomes of this nativar conversation. I think that's important for people to know as well.
And I think people are just now really starting to look at, from the pollinator perspective, how do these nativars compare to the straight species? So I think over time, we'll see more and more of that stuff coming out.
So our next question comes from Warren County, and they're asking, is it okay to dig up native plants plants that you find in the wild?
I was going to say no, and I'm pretty sure that it's a really big no.
I mean, it depends on where in the wild. Is it in your neighbor's, back 40 acres that you had permission to go, dig up whatever? But, you can also ask permission if it's on like a highway right of way. There are locations that you can, but if it's definitely a no if it's an arboretum or a botanic garden or someone else's property that you didn't ask permission for. Or state parks and national forests. Those are going to be no's without permission.
Yeah, I had Googled that and I found something from the USDA and the US Forest Service. And, it's, first of all, if it's not on property you own, okay, you either have to get permission or just don't do it. And there's the issue of depleting what we have naturally in the wild, because plant people, like all of us, we want a certain plant and we want to have it. And the concern is, yeah, that's a really cool plant, yeah, it's native, but if everybody goes out and digs it up, what happens? So according to them, it's a big no, but you can kind of circumvent that by working with some of your local agencies, like maybe Soil and Water or some other places, that work with these populations more. So it's an interesting article, and it really talked that it's not a good thing to do.
Yeah, I find it especially, I guess, scary for, again, a lack of better terms. I love native spring ephemerals. So you've got, your trilliums, your Virginia bluebells, and all those things. But unfortunately, their space, that they have existed in for thousands of years is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. And, from development to, and the invasion of species like bush honeysuckle and all of those, their habitat there in the woodland and woodland edges is just decimated. And so when I'm out there and I see, a prairie trillium, I'll use that as an example. Of course, I want that in my yard so badly. And there is some property that my family owns that has a beautiful stand of it. And I've wanted to go out there so badly and dig up a couple of those and put them in my own yard, but I've been holding myself back because, unfortunately, I recognize how little space they really have left to thrive in the wild. So that's my no side of it. Of course, there are species that are way more populous that you might not have as much of an issue with, but that's my argument for the no.
All right, our next question comes from Henderson County. We have very sandy soil on the bluff where we live overlooking the Mississippi River. Even the grass struggles. We read an extension article for ornamental or promoting native plants that are drought tolerant. What would you recommend for our ornamental landscape beds? We want it to look tidy, not too wild.
I would recommend, I have several species that I would recommend, but just a short list. Prairie onion, Allium stellatum is a good one for those kinds of conditions. Martha's butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. It is made for those dry conditions. There's a couple of other milkweeds too. What's the white one? World milkweed. Asclepias verticillata, I think, is the botanical name there.
Yeah.
Pale purple coneflower loves those dry, droughty conditions. There's some monardas. I think especially spotted bee balm. I know it's monarda, but I don't know the full botanical name on that one. And then of course, your grasses like big blue stem, little blue stem, prairie dropseed, some of those grassy species that have the roots that'll go down, 12 to 13 feet into the soil, the ones that are made for those drought conditions.
And in that situation, I always tell people, look around. What is growing on its own in the area? And maybe you can find something that's a relative of something you can find, or, a lot of times just take your clues, from what's in that area, get out beside your yard and walk for a while and see. That's sometimes your best bet.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you guys, Layne. Definitely what's growing around, and that made me think about what I see growing in some of the toughest conditions on bluffs in southern Illinois. You see a lot of eastern red cedar. So if they wanted some kind of evergreen, I bet you could get eastern red cedar to grow there. But a lot of times, maybe it's not desirable. But if they wanted a tree, that would be the tree that I would recommend.
It's a love-hate relationship with eastern red cedar. It's like you said, Austin, early on in the show, we don't have many evergreens in Illinois, like native ones. That's the one.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll grow anywhere.
Yeah.
And we have so many amazing trees and shrubs, and yet I know so few of them, because my area of expertise, if you want to call it that, would be the wildflowers and grasses. So it's great to have the input with the trees and shrubs there. Yeah.
This next question comes from Knox County. They are trying to control bush honeysuckle in their small half-acre woodland. Do they need to replace the native, or do they need to replace the bush honeysuckle with native shrubs or small trees? If so, what do you recommend?
Well, I think any of the plants that we've talked about so far, would do. The question was, does she have to replace them with natives?
I think, yeah, she's asking.
Okay. You don't have to. If it's your property, but if they want to go that route, there's everything that we've talked about today would certainly fit and do okay in Knox County. I know Austin talked about oak leaf hydrangeas. I have them. I'm only about 15 miles from Galesburg, and I've got several. So even some, and I do have the amethyst berry. So even those that were presented as being southern plants, they do well up here too.
We have species of viburnum that are native here, right, Austin?
Yeah, there are native viburnums that I have a short list here of good options for trying to get control of the bush honeysuckle. So number one, though, if you're wanting to get rid of bush honeysuckle, you have to adopt some of these kind of extreme controls. You're either needing to grind them down, dig them out, burn them out, something extreme. And you have to reiterate that every year while you're trying to promote these other desirable plants. But one that, you mentioned, Layne, is that red chokeberry. That's a good one. But it's usually not just one. You're going to need to kind of have a mix. Spice bush, inkberry, that's kind of a evergreen or a broadleaf evergreen. That gray dogwood that I mentioned, winterberry. So, and then viburnums as well. So things that are going to just take over, outcompete them, take out any kind of light that they're going to be able to get, just kind of, push out their resources. While you're still going in there and cutting them back, treating them every year, and you probably, once it's there, it's never totally gone. It's an iterative thing.
Yes, spice bush is a great one. That yellow fall color, and of course, me and my pollinators, the spice bush, swallowtail. It's a really beautiful native shrub.
Mm-hmm. There's a book that they might be interested in. It's put out by the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and it's Native Alternatives to Invasive Plants. And they talk about, if you're looking for a replacement for that particular honeysuckle, this is what we recommend. And it's a good place to start. And Chris, I can get you the information if you want to share it.
I was just making a note to make sure we include that in the description down below. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great resource. I've got some of their stuff in our office.
All right, our next question comes from Peoria County. I have a shaded hillside and woodland forest that is eroding away into a creek. What can I plant to help retain the soil?
Yeah, those are tough conditions. To stabilize that kind of soil on that kind of a slope, you've got to establish some sort of a ground cover, but it's not just a ground cover. You've got to have some shrubs and stuff in there, I would think. With my limited knowledge of that kind of condition, I'd be thinking about different sedges to give you some ground cover there. To hopefully prevent, at least some of that outer layer erosion that's happening. Pennsylvania sedge, rosy sedge are two that are, a little bit more common. You can do different species of ferns in those shady, hilly conditions. Can you think of others, Martha or Austin, or anyone else?
Well, that is a tough spot, and I'm trying to think of what would do well with more of a fibrous root system, and almost to the point where you would want something rhizomatous or something that's going to spread, because that's going to help hold your soil in place. And that's where everything that's coming to mind is not a native.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, there are native sedges that will spread like that. But the issue potentially with the erosion problem that we're talking about, their root systems aren't super deep, and so I think that you'd need to have bring in a species like spicebush, that nice wooded woodland shrub, to give you at least some areas where you've got some roots that are really taking root. Getting their feet really deep into the soil.
And there comes a time where you have that situation and you are trying to make it work for you, and in that situation, if they really want that look, then they might have to come in and try to do some walls or to hold, retaining that soil there, because one good gully washer, it could all go, but if there's a brace or something that's holding it back, so there does come a time when you have to think, okay, how can I achieve this and do it best for the plants?
I'll only add that these are all very situational, but even this, especially as Martha mentioned, sometimes you have to invest in structures and specific erosion control, built structures. And I will just add, as I learned in studying landscape architecture and soil engineering, geotechnical stuff, gravity will usually, let's just say gravity will always win eventually. And so you can engineer systems to hold soil temporarily. If you have a home or something that is on the top of the slope or on the bottom of the slope, to hold that soil temporarily, but eventually it's going to need some type of intervention, human intervention, to restabilize that soil structure. So it's always going to be something that will have to occur. Something will have to be inputted there.
Our next question is from Cass County. 3 of 4 of their dogwoods seem to be experiencing the same thing. and they're wondering if it is a disease. The leaves come on hard and brittle with little blooming during the spring. They identify the trees as being not old, but established. There are also many lower branches that don't produce foliage at all. Their house faces towards the north, and the trees sit east of their house. Do you guys have any suggestions or ideas of what's going on?
Again, with dogwood, and she says lower branches, I can only assume she's talking about flowering dogwood, or they're talking about flowering dogwood. So again, yeah, a little more information, what type are you exactly dealing with? They tend to be a somewhat understory tree. So it sounds like where they have it, it's seems to be getting the best sun. But I haven't heard of the leaves coming out more brittle. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, I'm unsure on that one too. That might be a good picture and plant clinic question. So,
I can look up Cornus. Like I said, I'm assuming it's Cornus florida, but
I'd say when in doubt, we refer them to the U of I plant clinic. And
you just read my mind. Yep.
Yeah.
It could be anything. On older dogs, sometimes the lower branches die back. It's just natural. If
Mhm.
trees, then that probably shouldn't be happening. And if it's on all four, yeah, that's happening. So
I also don't know the weather extremes it's experienced over the past couple of years. Was it, hot, dry summer followed by a wet fall and spring? I mean, all those things, those are the things that a lot of homeowners don't look at. Is you've got to take in the whole picture, not just what you are seeing right now, but what are the events that have led up and all of those stressors that are on that plant. That's why it's really being a detective sometimes to try to figure these things out.
Yeah, the hard brittle leaves, it kind of brought to mind the idea of scorch. Possibly something's happening with that vascular tissue where the plant can't get water, rot, fungus, something occurring within there. So I would say if that happened last spring, it's a wait and see game to see, will that tree leaf out in those same spots? If not, that might have been kind of that final kind of just expulsion of life for that tree in those areas.
Also, with flowering dogwood, the bud they have is really what they call a naked or exposed bud. So I'm not familiar with the weather of Cass County, but a lot of times up here, if we have a really cold winter, those buds just die off.
Cass County is north of me, so it's north of Morgan County. So at least in Jacksonville, all the dogwoods had flowers.
They do? Okay. Yeah, up here it's sporadic.
At least on my block, they had their flowers. All right, and our last question comes from Morgan County. So this is a question I got, and I gave them an answer, but I want everybody else's opinion on this. So we had a client calling, hoping that we may have a suggestion for a predator to control aphids on their milkweed. They're seeking information proactively for aphid control in late May and June for a rare milkweed species. I don't know which species it is. They liked it to be more of a predator bug than a chemical controlled, as they don't want to harm the milkweeds.
I get this question a lot, especially when the monarch butterflies, the caterpillars are emerging. And yeah, I've seen the caterpillars just chomp right through aphids and whatever. So if it's detrimental to the plant, before that stage, I don't know. Are there predator controls? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I mean, everything that I know or understand or have heard is that the best way to deal with this is to do it manually, it's like by hand, do it.
Pushing them off.
Or using like a mild dish soap solution, which probably won't harm the plant, but can harm, any monarchs that are on it. I have no idea what the right answer is for this one, if there is a right answer.
It could get some ladybugs.
That's what I was wondering about that, but I don't know how. I don't know.
Can you
Or is
control
it-
that very easily?
Right? Can this little tray of ladybugs just stay on this one plant and not fly away?
Is it the larva of the lady beetle? Is that what it is?
Both the
What's
adults
it-
and larvae will feed on them.
Aphid lions? What are those?
Lacewings.
Lacewings. Okay.
There's also parasitoid wasps that will feed on flies. They'll lay their eggs inside of them and be like alien and pop out when they're ready to
Pop out.
emerge. And there's flies that'll attack. There's a lot of different insects that'll attack aphids. If you've got this in where you've got abundant flora resources, you're probably going to have those predators there already, assuming you're not spraying everything. Your syrphid flies here, those larvae will feed on aphids.
Cool.
And yeah, again, the squishing,
Mhm.
take all your frustrations on the aphids and stuff like that. And you could spray them off with a steady stream of water. A lot of times that'll do a good job of managing them too.
I've heard vegetable gardeners using milkweed as a nurse crop to raise predators to take care of pests on their vegetable garden. They leave the aphids on the nurse crop on the milkweed. So then there's always a steady food supply there. I've seen that happen. It was a Texas A&M. Actually, they did a little video on that. So interesting.
Cool.
Well, that was a lot of very wonderful information. We might have to do a part 1, part 2. I might have to split this puppy up here, folks. But we had a lot of so much good information. And I feel like we could keep going, but I can't pay you guys anymore. I mean, I've already wrote the checks. So
Yeah. Checks in the mail.
it is in the mail. But I want to thank our special guests for being here today. Austin, Martha, Layne, thank all of you so much from Southern Illinois, East Central, West Central Illinois. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you.
It's fun.
Excellent. Well, we will have them on again, folks. Don't you worry about that, to talk more about native plants and maybe to get the top 10 of their favorites. So we will see about that. The Good Growing Podcast is produced by Wendy Ferguson and edited by me, Chris Enroth. A special thanks goes to Ken and Katie for being our co-hosts to guide us through the questions that we get every single week. So thank you, Ken and Katie.
Thank you guys for joining us. And I think I like this 6. This is fun. Have more people for a party.
It's very Brady Bunchy. Yes.
Do 9 next time.
There you go.
Yes, thank you, Layne and Austin and Martha, and Chris and Katie. Thank you as always, and let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We will be talking with Dr. Michael Ward with the Illinois Natural History Survey about bird nesting boxes, birding, and citizen science projects that we can do with birds. So, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, for watching. And as always, keep on growing.